The chandelier above the Plaza Hotel ballroom scattered light across 300 faces like broken promises. Victoria Stone stood at the podium in a silver dress that cost more than most people earned in a month, discussing affordable housing to an audience that had never worried about rent. Her voice carried the practiced cadence of someone who'd learned to speak in board meetings before learning to grieve in private. 2 floors above, Marcus Cole knelt beside an HVAC unit that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. The ductwork carried whispers of laughter and champagne glasses, a soundtrack to a world he serviced but never inhabited. He checked his watch, another 2 hours before he could drive back to Brooklyn, where Noah waited with homework spread across their kitchen table and questions about fractions that Marcus actually enjoyed answering. The air handler kicked on with a shudder. Marcus placed his palm against the housing, feeling the vibration translate into data his hands understood better than any diagnostic screen. Bearing wearing thin on the north side, maybe 3 weeks before failure. He made a note, the kind of quiet competence that kept buildings standing and people comfortable without anyone noticing the man in the basement who made it possible. Below, Emma Stone fidgeted with a microphone at table 7. 10 years old, dark hair pulled back in a way that made her look like a smaller version of her mother, except for the eyes. Those belonged to a father she barely remembered, but missed in the way children miss things they can't quite name. The gala program had reached the portion where donors pretended their generosity wasn't also a tax strategy, and Emma had reached the portion of the evening where patience ended and truth began. She lifted the microphone. The motion caught a waiter's attention, then a camera operator's, then rippled outward until the ballroom held its breath without quite knowing why. Her voice carried with the clarity of someone who hadn't yet learned that some questions were meant to stay private. "Mom, when do I get a dad who's actually here?" The silence that followed had weight. 300 people simultaneously tried to determine if this was performance art or disaster, and Victoria's face made it clear which answer was correct. She stepped away from the podium with the kind of control that comes from years of hiding cracks behind professional veneers, crouching to Emma's height while flashbulbs painted the moment for tomorrow's headlines. Marcus heard it through the vent, that child's voice cutting through ductwork and dignity with equal ease. He paused mid-notation, pen hovering above his clipboard. The kid had guts. Reminded him of Noah last month, standing in the principal's office defending a classmate from bullies twice his size, refusing to apologize for doing the right thing, even when it cost him recess for a week. Victoria's response carried through the building's bones, calm and measured in that way that meant she was anything but. "Sweetheart, we'll talk about this at home." Emma's follow-up landed like a courtroom closing argument. But home doesn't listen like 300 people do. The ballroom didn't know whether to applaud or call security. Victoria made a decision in the space between heartbeats, the kind of choice that defined leadership more than quarterly earnings ever could. She stood, took the microphone, and acknowledged what everyone else wanted to pretend they hadn't heard. Marcus returned to his work, the moment already filed away as none of his business. He had a bearing to replace, a son waiting at home, and exactly $43 in his checking account until Friday's paycheck cleared. Whatever happened in ballrooms stayed in ballrooms, separated from his world by more than just floor levels and tax brackets. The penthouse smelled like lemon cleaning solution and the kind of silence that came after difficult evenings. Emma sat cross-legged on the kitchen island, still in her dress, eating ice cream directly from the container, because some nights required breaking the rules. Victoria had traded her heels for bare feet and her composure for something closer to honesty. Emma spoke first because she usually did. "I miss Dad, but I also miss someone who plays catch and fixes bike chains and knows how to make pancakes that don't taste like a chemistry experiment." Victoria measured her words like a lawyer measuring evidence. "I know. I've been focusing on the company, making sure we're secure, making sure you have everything you need." "I don't need everything. I need someone." The truth of it sat between them like a third person at the table. Victoria had spent 4 years building walls out of work, convincing herself that providing material stability was the same as providing emotional presence. Emma had spent 4 years growing up with a mother who could run a corporation but struggled to remember what childhood actually required. Victoria pulled out her phone the way she always did when confronted with problems that needed systematic solutions. By morning, she'd have a plan. She always did. The plan arrived in Nora Patel's office at 7 a.m., fully formed and slightly manic. Nora, who'd been Victoria's COO for 6 years and her friend for longer, took one look at the document and reached for stronger coffee. The proposal outlined a 4-month timeline with 5 pre-vetted candidates, each connected to Stone Development's professional network in ways that provided natural proximity without the artificial pressure of arranged dating. Elliot Vance, 42, taught mock trial at a public school on Saturdays, despite running one of the city's most successful land use law practices. Dr. Marcus Bell specialized in pediatric cardiology and was advising a wellness center that wanted to partner on Stone's Riverside project. Grant Whitlow made money do backflips for charitable foundations and had the kind of charm that made investors write checks before realizing they'd been persuaded. Lewis Callahan designed buildings that remembered their neighborhoods instead of erasing them. And Raphael Stone, a distant cousin by marriage, ran hotels like orchestras while offering long-term housing for Stone's Veterans Initiative. Nora set down the brief. These are all accomplished men. Any of them would look good on paper and better in photos. But you're not hiring a consultant. You're looking for a father for Emma. Which is why Emma gets input. Dr. Klein agrees. She needs a voice in this. And you need what? Control? Structure? A way to make grief look like project management? Victoria's silence was its own answer. She'd built Stone Development, from her late husband's small firm into an empire that employed 400 people and housed thousands. She understood timelines, deliverables, measurable outcomes. Love had proven messier, its loss even more so, and the idea of approaching it without a framework felt like stepping off a ledge without checking the drop. Nora leaned back. 4 months, 5 candidates, and then what happens when none of them make Emma feel the way she felt when her dad was alive? You can't engineer a family the way you engineer a building. No, but I can make sure we don't settle for the first person who seems nice. Emma deserves someone who sees her, really sees her, not just the CEO's daughter with a trust fund and connections. Across the city, in a walk-up where the radiator clanked like a prisoner demanding release, Marcus sat at a kitchen table covered in bills that refused to resolve themselves through force of will alone. $8,400 in medical debt from Noah's broken arm last year, the kind of injury that happened when 8-year-olds climb things they shouldn't and physics remembered to work. The hospital had been understanding, which meant they'd agreed to a payment plan that would take 3 years to clear if he never missed a month and nothing else went wrong. His maintenance salary at Stone Development covered rent, groceries budgeted down to the dollar, and Noah's after-school program. The freelance CAD work he picked up on nights and weekends added another $200 weekly. The difference between making ends meet and watching them drift further apart. He'd been an engineer once, the kind who could read a blueprint the way other people read newspapers and see problems 3 months before they became crises. That was before Dave Patterson, his partner at Shaw and Associates, had cut corners on a structural certification and blamed Marcus when the building inspector caught it. Before the lawsuit that cleared Marcus legally but destroyed him professionally. Before he learned that being right and being employable weren't always compatible. Noah appeared in the doorway, 8 years old, and already learning to read his father's silences. "Dad, you okay?" Marcus shuffled the bills into a drawer, muscle memory from months of shielding his son from math that didn't add up. "Just work stuff, buddy. You finished that homework?" Fractions. They're like cutting pizza, right? The bottom number is how many slices. The top number is how many you get. That's exactly right. See? You're already smarter than half the engineers I used to work with. Noah climbed into the chair across from him, the seriousness of his expression belonging to someone twice his age. The kids at school asked if we're poor. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, the particular hurt that came from knowing your child carried burdens they shouldn't have to understand yet. "We're not poor, Noah. We're careful. There's a difference. We have a home, we have food, we have each other. Some people have a lot more money and a lot less of what matters." Like Emma Stone? The name caught Marcus off guard. Who's Emma Stone? Girl at school, her mom owns buildings. She has a driver and fancy stuff, but she told me she'd trade it all for her dad to come back. He died when she was 6. Marcus pulled his son close, feeling the weight of single parenthood press against his shoulders like physical force. Then she understands something a lot of adults don't. Money can't buy back the people we lose. It just buys different kinds of empty. Later, after Noah fell asleep with his nightlight casting shadows of stars across the ceiling, Marcus returned to the laptop and the freelance work that kept them afloat. He was designing a load-bearing solution for a warehouse conversion in Queens, the kind of problem he could solve in his sleep, the kind of work that reminded him he'd been good at this once. Before the betrayal, before the choice between his integrity and his career turned out not to be a choice at all. The construction site at Block 17 wore winter like a challenge. Scaffolding climbed toward a sky the color of old metal, and the skeleton of what would become mixed-use housing stood exposed to elements that didn't care about timelines or budgets. Victoria arrived with Emma and Louis Callahan, the architect who designed the building to include corner stores where families could buy groceries without crossing major intersections. Because good design remembered that not everyone had cars or time to travel for necessities. Louis handed Emma a child-size hard hat with stone development stenciled across the front in letters that made her grin. Rule 1, you can ask any question. Bad questions don't exist on job sites. Emma strapped the chin band with the seriousness of someone accepting an oath. Okay, why are pigeons always invited to construction? Louis crouched to her level, his expression matching her gravity. Because they never sign NDAs. Can't trust a bird with secrets. Emma's laugh echoed off concrete and steel, and Victoria watched Louis interact with her daughter the way you might study a dance you'd forgotten the steps to. He was patient, inclusive, treated Emma like a person rather than an accessory to her mother's wealth, the kind of man who might check boxes on a list designed to measure suitability. They walked the perimeter while Louis explained load paths in terms that made architecture sound like storytelling. This column is bone, the facade is skin, the HVAC system is breathing. Emma touched a steel beam with reverence usually reserved for museum exhibits. So this is alive? In a way, buildings remember what we put into them. You can feel it years later, whether they were built with care or just speed. They approached the freight elevator, and a superintendent waved while frowning at a control panel that beeped protest. The man was thick-shouldered and gray at the temples, the kind of supervisor who'd earned authority through decades rather than degrees. She's been temperamental all week, maintenance scheduled for Monday, but she'll get you topside, 10 minutes maybe. Victoria hesitated, some instinct suggesting stairs might be wiser. Louis read her pause. Top deck has the best view. Worth it if you're sure? The superintendent pried the gate open, listening to machinery the way mechanics listen to engines. You'll be fine. Just take it slow. They stepped into the cage. The elevator lurched upward with a groan that sounded almost biological, then stopped with a shudder that turned Victoria's stomach. The lights flickered once, twice, died, returned half-strength. The car settled into stillness between floors 3 and 4, like a pause mid-sentence, leaving them suspended in metal and growing darkness. Emma's fingers found Victoria's coat, gripping fabric hard enough to leave impressions. Mom? The elevator dropped 2 inches, caught itself, swayed. Louis pressed the emergency button while maintaining the kind of calm that came from training rather than feeling. Elevator car 2 stalled between 3 and 4. 3 passengers, no injuries. A voice crackled through the speaker, professional and distant. Copy, maintenance en route, stay calm. But Emma's breathing had already shifted, rapid and shallow. The early signs of panic Victoria recognized from the weeks after Matthew's funeral, when their daughter would wake screaming from dreams she couldn't explain. The small space contracted around them, walls pressing closer in perception, if not reality. Victoria crouched to eye level, trying for lightness, while her own pulse hammered warnings. Look at me, count my freckles. I earned them in boardrooms without windows. Emma shook her head, words coming fast and thin. I can't feel the edges. The air is sticky. A knock on the outer door, firm but not urgent. Then a voice that carried authority without volume. Hey there, name's Marcus, maintenance. You're safe. Something in the tone cut through Emma's rising panic. Not the false cheer of someone pretending everything was fine, but the steady certainty of someone who'd navigated emergencies before and remembered the script. Victoria pressed her palm against the cold metal as if she could absorb that calm through molecular transmission. Marcus continued, his voice filtered through steel but clear. I'm going to ask you to do something with me. Pick a number between 1 and 10. Emma's response came small and scared. 7. 7, that's my lucky number too. You know what 7 means? It means we breathe like we're blowing out birthday candles. Ready? In through your nose for 4 beats, out through your mouth for 6. Can you help me practice? Victoria felt Emma's grip loosen fractionally as her daughter focused on the breathing exercise, counting aloud, matching rhythm to instruction. Louis stood silent, recognizing his role in this moment was witness rather than participant. Marcus kept talking, each word measured and purposeful. This elevator is lying to you. It tells your brain the sky disappeared, but the sky didn't go anywhere. Your brain just forgot where the door is. So we remind it. Name 5 things you can touch right now. Emma's voice grew steadier as she focused. Metal wall, my hard hat, Mom's sleeve, my own hand, Mr. Lewis's elbow. Perfect. Now 4 things you hear. The humming sound, your voice, Mom's heartbeat. It's really fast. Through the door, Marcus's response carried a smile. We don't judge heartbeats around here. And the 4th thing? My own breath. It's slower now. Outside, Marcus worked the crowbar with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood leverage and patience in equal measure. He'd been in elevators that stuck before, back when engineering was his job title instead of his secret, and he knew the mathematics of rescue. Careful progression beat desperate speed every time. The metal groaned under persuasion, yielding inch by grudging inch. His voice never stopped, threading through the work like rope through pulleys. I'm opening the door now. You won't fall. Elevators are stubborn, not cruel. We take it slow because slow is smart. Light cut across the elevator floor, a stripe of hope widening with each minute of effort. Marcus appeared in the gap, tool belt hanging from his waist, work shirt dark with exertion, eyes that carried the kind of calm usually associated with people who'd survived worse and remembered the lessons. He didn't reach in immediately, didn't grab, just extended his hand and let Emma choose the contact. She reached. He anchored her weight with the kind of strength that didn't require acknowledgement, lifting her through the opening and onto solid hallway floor with movements economical enough to seem effortless. Emma didn't step back once her feet found purchase. Instead, she looked up at him with an expression Victoria couldn't quite parse, gratitude mixed with something closer to recognition. Emma's first words carried the solemnity of someone delivering a verdict. You used a nice voice. Marcus's response came with a half smile that suggested he saved his full one for special occasions. I keep the mean voice for broken vacuum cleaners. It's less effective on people. Louis climbed out next, then Victoria, whose relief manifested as a tight grip on professional composure, even as her legs remembered they'd been standing on uncertain ground. Marcus accepted the superintendent's apology and launched into technical explanation. Relay failure, offline until component swap, standard protocol. But Victoria caught the way his language shifted. He spoke like someone who understood systems from the inside out, who could translate machinery into meaning without consulting manuals. Emma studied his tool belt with the intensity of someone cataloging important details. Do you fix everything? I try not to make it worse. That's half the job right there. The superintendent bustled over with assurances and offers to comp dry cleaning, but Victoria's attention stayed on Marcus, on the way he'd led them through crisis using nothing but voice and competence. No title required. She'd seen Elliot negotiate million-dollar deals, watched Grant make markets bend to his will, observed Louis transform blueprints into neighborhoods. But this man in coveralls had done something none of them could. He'd made Emma feel safe when the ground beneath him had disappeared. Marcus knelt to check the tool cart he'd left in the hallway, and Victoria found herself asking before thinking it through. Were you on your way to us when this happened? He looked up, and for a moment she saw past the maintenance uniform to something that didn't quite fit the role, headed to the roof. Heaters making dramatic gestures in February. It's a whole thing. The comment landed somewhere between technical jargon and poetry, delivered with the timing of someone who understood language the way he understood elevators. Emma whispered to Victoria, her voice carrying just far enough, "Is he on the list?" Victoria kept her expression neutral, even as she felt something shift in her carefully constructed plan. "The list is for scheduled meetings. He just saved us in real life." Emma's response held the kind of wisdom that came from watching adults complicate simple truths. Sometimes real life is the meeting. Monday morning arrived with the reliability of debt, and the Stone Development headquarters lobby gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that required Marcus's presence at 5 a.m. He knelt beside a baseboard panel, tightening screws that had worked themselves loose through seasons of expansion and contraction, making mental notes about which sections would need replacement come spring. The building settled around him with familiar sounds, elevator cables humming their vertical routes, HVAC breathing life into empty floors, the electrical system clicking through its morning routine. Victoria and Emma entered through the main doors, and Emma spotted him before her mother's stride could carry them past. "It's the 7 guy." Marcus stood, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen cleaner days. "Morning, just making stuck things move again." Emma approached without the hesitation adults learned through years of respecting invisible barriers. "We're going to Mom's office. Want to come?" The suggestion landed with the gentle absurdity of childhood logic that hadn't yet internalized corporate hierarchy. Marcus caught Victoria's eye, and something passed between them. Not quite humor, not quite discomfort, but an acknowledgement that Emma had just said something true that also couldn't happen. "I don't think they let maintenance crash CEO meetings." Emma's response carried conviction. "Maybe they should." Victoria filed the moment away as they continued to the elevator, but not before Marcus caught the faint curve at the corner of her mouth, the kind of almost smile that suggested Emma's comment had landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. The executive meeting felt like dying by committee. Paul, the project manager, spread blueprints across the glass conference table, with the resignation of someone delivering bad news he'd already delivered twice. "Riverton is 3 weeks behind schedule. The engineering firm can't reroute the substructure supports without full redesign." Wall, the structural engineer on speakerphone, added his own chorus of impossibility. "We're talking $600,000, minimum 3 months. That's if we start today and nothing else goes wrong." Victoria felt the walls of carefully managed timelines collapse inward. Riverton represented housing for 120 families, the centerpiece of next year's portfolio, leveraged for 2 philanthropic partnerships that depended on Stone Development's reputation for delivering impossible projects on time. Losing Riverton meant more than quarterly setbacks. It meant people staying in overcrowded apartments, children sharing rooms who shouldn't have to, families pushed further from jobs and schools by rental markets that didn't care about their stories. A knock interrupted her spiraling calculations. Marcus entered carrying an envelope, his work boots tracking evidence of basement excursions across carpet designed for different kinds of feet. "Mailroom sent this up. Looks important." He placed it on her desk, but his eyes snagged on the blueprints spread across the conference table like evidence at a crime scene. The pause lasted maybe 3 seconds, long enough for his gaze to track load paths and identify problems the engineers had spent weeks failing to solve. Paul's voice carried territorial warning. "Those are confidential." Marcus's attention shifted to Victoria, and she found herself giving permission before quite knowing why. "It's Riverton. We're stuck on engineering issues. Why do you ask?" Marcus stepped closer to the table, his finger tracing the northern column grid with the precision of someone reading a language others had forgotten. "Load transfer bottleneck right here. If you swap to staggered micropiles with a stepped footing, you can carry the same load without relocating utilities. Cuts installation time by about 2/3. The room achieved the particular silence that follows unexpected competence. Paul blinked twice, recalculating assumptions. "That's actually not bad." Victoria leaned forward, some instinct recognizing this wasn't lucky guessing. "What did you do before maintenance work?" Marcus straightened, and something in his posture suggested this was a story he'd learned to tell without emotion. "Project manager, civil engineering, before a bad lawsuit and a worse friend taught me about humility." The structural engineer's voice crackled through the speaker. Who is this? Marcus Cole. I mop floors and fix elevators now, but the math still works. The engineer's skepticism gave way to professional curiosity. The micro-pile approach could actually solve this. We'd need calculations to confirm, but the concept is sound. Victoria made a decision that felt like stepping off the carefully marked path her 4-month plan had outlined. Can you run those calculations? Marcus shrugged, the gesture carrying neither false modesty nor inappropriate pride. Professional itch. Consider it my way of making sure good projects don't die of paperwork. No charge. That evening at 9:17 p.m., Victoria's inbox pinged with an email from an address that had never appeared in her corporate correspondence before. The subject line read, Riverton Load Transfer Preliminary, and the attached PDF opened to reveal diagrams that belonged in presentations from firms charging 5 figures for consultation. Clean, precise, annotated with field notes that suggested experience beyond theoretical knowledge. At the bottom, a single line. Victoria, no guarantees, but this is the path I'd bet my own roof on. Marcus. She sat at her kitchen counter, reading the document, while Emma slept upstairs and the city performed its nightly transformation from business to life. The work was exceptional, the kind of solution that made complex problems look obvious in retrospect. But what caught her attention was the note itself, the casual confidence of someone willing to stake personal property on professional judgment. 2 days later, the City Review Board approved the modified plan without revision. Riverton jolted back into motion, deadlines shifting from impossible to merely ambitious. Victoria found Marcus in the sub-basement, where he was coaxing a stubborn water line into cooperation with tools and patience in equal measure. She didn't announce herself immediately, just watched him work. The economy of motion that came from years of practice. The way he listened to pipes, the way doctors listened to heartbeats, reading diagnosis from sound. When she finally spoke, he didn't startle. You just saved us millions of dollars. Marcus glanced up, wiping his hands. I just hated seeing a good project die of paperwork. Why didn't you go back to engineering after the lawsuit cleared? He leaned against the pipe he'd been repairing, and Victoria saw the calculation behind his eyes. The choice between easy deflection and harder truth. Life's not linear. I had a son to raise, legal mess to climb out of, and no appetite for partners who cut corners. Janitorial work is honest. Nobody lies to you about where the dirt is. The answer carried more weight than its words, speaking to principles that had cost him professionally, but kept him whole personally. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but Emma's voice echoed down the stairwell before she could form the thought. Emma appeared, clutching a sketch pad, Noah trailing behind her with the comfortable familiarity of school friends who'd somehow orchestrated this coincidence. I drew the elevator we got stuck in, and a better one, see? It has windows. Marcus crouched to examine her work with the seriousness it deserved. Smart. Everything feels safer with a view. Victoria watched the interaction, noting how Marcus looked at Emma, not with the indulgence adults often showed children they were trying to impress, but with genuine attention, as if her opinions already held value worth considering. It was a small thing, easy to miss, but Victoria had spent years learning to read people through what they didn't say as much as what they did. That night, alone in her penthouse while Emma slept and the city stretched its lights toward horizons measured in property values, Victoria opened Marcus's email again. Not to review the engineering calculations, though those remained flawless under examination, but to reread the closing line. The path I'd bet my own roof on. She thought about Emma's sketch, about Riverton's future tenants who would never know they had homes because a man in coveralls remembered blueprints, about the distance between where someone stood and what they were worth. Some people existed exactly where they needed to be, she realized, not because of titles printed on business cards, but because of what they carried quietly until the right moment demanded they use it. She whispered into her empty kitchen, the words carrying weight they probably shouldn't. I see you, Marcus Cole, even if nobody else does yet. The Fairmont rooftop bar traded in altitude and exclusivity with equal currency. Glass walls captured sunset over Manhattan, while staff circulated with precision choreography, delivering cocktails that cost more than Marcus's weekly grocery budget. Victoria had arranged this gathering 3 weeks after the elevator incident, an informal evening where the 5 candidates could interact without the pressure of obvious audition. Emma sat in the corner with art supplies, sketching the skyline while staying close enough to observe without participating. Marcus hadn't been invited. This was official candidate territory, the men whose resumes aligned with Victoria's 4-month framework. Elliot charmed a small group with stories from his pro bono legal work. Grant discussed market strategies with board members who'd appeared uninvited but welcome. Lewis and Raphael traded observations about architecture and hospitality with the easy rapport of people accustomed to rooms like this. Victoria arrived deliberately late, wanting to see how they behaved when the person they were supposed to impress wasn't watching. She paused near the entrance, cataloging details. Grant's voice carried just far enough to reach her position. You can't tell me she's serious about giving the kid that much say in this. It's optics for the press. Raphael swirled his whiskey with practiced casualness. Sure, press loves the modern fairy tale angle, but a janitor? That's a headline you can't scrub away. Lewis chuckled, the sound holding more edge than humor. I heard he helped save Riverton. Probably thinks that buys him a seat at the table. Elliot adjusted his cufflinks with the precision of someone who'd learned gestures that communicated status. Saving a project doesn't mean you belong in the boardroom. Or the family. Those are different leagues entirely. Emma's pencil stopped moving. She looked up from her sketch with an expression that reminded Victoria why underestimating children was always a mistake. Her voice cut through the ambient music and careful conversation like a blade finding flesh. Mr. Cole fixes things that people like you don't even see are broken. The silence that followed had texture, surprise wrapped in discomfort, wrapped in the dawning realization that they'd been overheard by exactly the wrong person. Victoria stepped into the light before anyone could recover enough to apologize. Emma, why don't you grab a soda from the bar? When her daughter was safely out of earshot, Victoria turned to the men with the expression she usually reserved for investors who'd miss quarterly projections. You're here because I believed you had enough self-awareness to understand this isn't just about me. If you can't respect the people that my daughter respects, you've already lost. Elliot's jaw tightened. We were just... Victoria cut through his deflection with surgical precision. I know exactly what you were just. And for the record, Riverton's tenants won't know the difference between a boardroom league and a maintenance closet. They'll just be grateful for walls that stand and heat that works. She walked away before apologies could form, found Emma at the fountain in the lobby, stirring ice cubes with a straw while wearing an expression too old for 10 years. Emma didn't look up. They don't like him. The statement arrived without question marks, pure observation delivered with the clarity of someone who'd already processed the data and reached conclusions. Victoria sat on the fountain's edge. They don't know him. Emma met her mother's eyes. They don't want to. That sentence lodged itself in Victoria's mind with the persistence of stones in shoes, impossible to ignore no matter how she shifted weight. She'd built a careful plan with timelines and candidates and measurable criteria, approaching her daughter's need for a father figure the way she approached construction projects, with structure, milestones, quality control. But Emma had just identified a variable Victoria's spreadsheets couldn't capture: the difference between men who looked good on paper and men who showed up when elevators stuck between floors. Marcus's apartment building wore its age honestly, the kind of structure that remembered when Brooklyn meant working families instead of coffee shops charging $7 for foam art. He climbed 3 flights because the elevator had been temporarily out of service for 16 months, his tool bag heavy against his shoulder, his mind running calculations about bearing replacements and the medical bills that still arrived with depressing regularity. Noah was asleep in the bunk bed they'd assembled together last year, following instructions that turned Swedish diagrams into something functional and almost sturdy. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching his son's chest rise and fall with a steady rhythm that meant peaceful dreams, or at least the absence of nightmares. Some nights, Noah woke calling for his mother, who'd left when the lawsuit destroyed Marcus's income and revealed exactly what their marriage had been built on. Those nights were getting rarer, but Marcus still listened for them. The kitchen table held the familiar archaeology of financial struggle: Bills sorted by urgency, a grocery list calculated down to the dollar, the payment plan for Noah's broken arm that would take 36 more months to clear if nothing else went wrong. Marcus opened his laptop to the freelance CAD work that kept them fed, designing support structures for buildings he'd never see completed, solving problems for people who'd never know his name. An email notification appeared, and his hands started trembling before his conscious mind registered the sender. Legal Services of New York, routine correspondence regarding the Shaw and Associates lawsuit that had ended 3 years ago, but still generated paperwork like aftershocks following earthquakes. His breath shortened, vision tunneling, the kitchen walls pressing closer in perception, if not reality. The flashback hit with visceral force. Dave Patterson on the witness stand, lying under oath about who'd approved the corner cutting on structural certifications. Marcus trying to defend himself while his lawyer signaled silence. The judge's gavel punctuating his professional death. The pink slip that arrived before the verdict. His firm unwilling to retain someone who'd chosen whistleblowing over loyalty. Marcus counted backward from 10, named 5 objects he could see, forced his breathing into the same rhythm he'd taught Emma Stone in that stuck elevator. The panic attack subsided slowly, leaving him sweating and shaking at his own kitchen table while his son slept unaware 2 rooms away. Noah's voice came small from the hallway. "Dad, you okay?" Marcus wiped his face, arranging his expression into something closer to normal. "Bad dream, buddy. Go back to sleep." Noah patted closer, 8 years old, but already learning to read silences. The court dream again? The lie came automatic. Just work stuff, nothing to worry about. Noah saw through it with the clarity children possess before they learned polite deception. "Emma Stone's mom is nice. Emma told me Mrs. Stone likes you." The words hit Marcus like physical force, triggering a different kind of panic. "Noah, I can't be liked by someone like that. We don't live in the same world." "But you helped her. Emma said you were the calmest person she ever met." After Noah finally returned to bed, Marcus sat in darkness, thinking about Victoria Stone. Smart, kind, but operating in a universe where his annual salary probably wouldn't cover her dry cleaning budget. What did he offer? Debt, PTSD, a maintenance worker's paycheck, and an 8-year-old who deserved better than watching his father shake at kitchen tables. But then he remembered the elevator, the way Victoria had looked at him after Riverton, Emma's trust that he could make stuck things move. Maybe he didn't have to fit her world. Maybe he just had to be honest about his own. He pulled out a notebook, drew a line down the center, wrote reasons to stay away on one side and reasons to try on the other. The first column filled quickly: money, status, trauma, risk to Noah, PTSD episodes, medical debt, the chasm between their lives. The second column took longer, just 3 entries that somehow weighed heavier. She sees me. Emma trusts me. I haven't felt this alive in 5 years. He circled the word alive. The Riverside Fair occupied waterfront space with the temporary permanence of traveling carnivals, transforming parking lots into small worlds complete with carousel horses that had seen better decades and game booths where physics defeated optimism with reliable frequency. Victoria had brought Emma for mother-daughter time, a Saturday afternoon away from buildings and balance sheets. They found Noah Cole in line for the carousel, and Marcus stood beside his son, holding corn dogs with the sheepish expression of someone caught doing exactly what he'd planned. Victoria's surprise registered genuine. Small city. Marcus's response carried equal parts acknowledgement and deflection. Smaller fare. The children negotiated carousel politics, who deserved the purple horse, whether height or age should determine hierarchy, while the adults stood by the railing watching winter light turn the Hudson River silver. The silence between Victoria and Marcus held comfort instead of pressure, the kind of quiet that didn't require filling. Victoria spoke first, testing words she'd been thinking for days. "Emma's right about you. You do fix things people don't see are broken." Well, Marcus kept his eyes on the carousel, on Noah's laughter cutting through calliope music. "I don't do it for credit." "I know, that's what makes it dangerous." He turned to meet her gaze. "Dangerous how?" "For men like you, people think you don't mind being overlooked when you're actually just focused on work that matters more than recognition." The observation landed with unexpected accuracy, cutting through years of Marcus's careful self-presentation to something truer underneath. He'd spent 5 years telling himself he didn't care about the engineering career he'd lost. That honest work with simple expectations was enough. But Victoria had just named the lie he'd been living, not the part about finding satisfaction in maintenance work, which was real, but the part about not missing the problems he used to solve, the buildings he used to save, the respect his competence had once commanded. The carousel slowed, depositing Noah and Emma with wind-tangled hair, and the kind of happiness that made adult concerns seem smaller by comparison. Victoria watched Marcus crouch to Noah's level, brushing cotton candy from his son's jacket with the unconscious care of single parenthood. Something in the symmetry of the moment, two kids laughing, two adults standing guard, unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite categorize. Marcus stood, hands in his jacket pockets. If someone tried to make my life harder at Stone Development, would you tell me? The question carried weight beyond its words, acknowledging threats neither of them had named but both suspected existed. Victoria measured her answer. Depends. Are you asking as my employee or as Emma's friend? Both. Then yes, but only if I couldn't fix it myself first. The response satisfied something in Marcus's expression, though Victoria couldn't tell if it was the promise of protection or the acknowledgement that he'd try to handle problems independently before asking for help. They walked back toward the parking area while the kids negotiated who would win in a fight between a carousel horse and a Ferris wheel car, the kind of debate that mattered intensely in the moment and not at all in memory. Victoria knew storms were forming beyond the fairground lights, could feel them gathering in Philip Ashford's careful questions about Marcus during board meetings, in the way investors watched her interactions with staff, in the reality that choosing someone outside the carefully vetted five would invite scrutiny she might not control. But watching Emma slip her hand into Marcus's as they walked, seeing Noah look up at her with the trust children reserve for people who'd proven themselves safe, Victoria recognized a truth her 4-month plan had failed to anticipate. Sometimes the right answer appeared in moments you hadn't scheduled, delivered by people who weren't on any list, solving problems you hadn't known how to name. Emma's voice carried back to her, pitched just loud enough to be overheard. Mr. Cole fixes things people like those guys at the bar don't even see are broken. Marcus's response came quieter. That's because I've been on enough job sites to know the person yelling loudest is usually the least useful. I learned to measure people by who's still holding the beam when everyone else steps back. The words settled into Victoria's memory with the weight of principles rather than platitudes. She'd spent her career in rooms full of people who spoke in quarterly projections and market strategies, who measured success in figures that appeared on balance sheets. Marcus measured it in bearing replacements that prevented failures and load calculations, that kept families housed, and breathing exercises that stopped children from panicking in small spaces. The difference mattered. Victoria just wasn't sure yet what she was willing to risk to choose it. Monday morning arrived with the bureaucratic precision of machinery Victoria understood too well. The boardroom on the 42nd floor filled with people whose titles suggested authority and whose agendas remained opaque until they needed them revealed. Paul entered her office before the scheduled meeting, blueprints forgotten, expression carrying news that landed like terminal diagnosis. His words stripped away the weekend's careful distance from corporate warfare. Midtown Tower atrium drawings are missing from the project share. Final revision set. Philip Ashford flagged it at 7:10 this morning, says we have a security breach. Victoria's fingers stopped mid-reach for her coffee, physics taking over where intention faltered. Who has access to those files? Senior team plus facilities for logistics coordination. That includes Cole. The name settled between them with implications neither wanted to examine. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, recognizing the shape of attacks before their full form became visible. Philip Ashford didn't make casual observations about security protocols. He orchestrated them. The conference room smelled like expensive cologne and institutional anxiety. IT director hunched over a laptop glowing blue with logs that documented digital movement in timestamps exact enough to convict. HR sat with legal pads that would transform human complexity into policy violations. Philip occupied the far end in a suit that announced its cost through subtlety rather than flash. Hands spread in theatrical concern that fooled exactly nobody who'd spent time reading investor plays. His opening carried the false sympathy of someone performing care. Unfortunate situation, but we need swift action. Those drawings are proprietary. Any leak jeopardizes the capital stack for a $200 million project. 80 projected access logs across the screen where everyone could perform their own calculations. The data told its story in digital absolutes. 6:41 p.m. Friday document labeled Atrium Rev Final moved to local folder on removable drive. User credential P. Ashford. 6:43 p.m. Same credential moved it back to network share. 6:48 p.m. Different credential. Ahem. Cole accessed the shared emergency directory. Philip's delivery achieved the perfect balance between reluctance and necessity. There you have it. Maintenance supervisor browsing a folder that has nothing to do with his responsibilities. Night crew badge logs, place him on that floor, near the server closet. HR glanced toward Victoria with the expression of people executing protocols they'd rather avoid. We need to suspend Mr. Cole pending investigation. Due process, naturally. Victoria kept her voice level through force of will that felt like physical labor. We don't punish access. We punish intent. Those are different standards. Philip spread his hands wider, magnanimity personified. Intent? He was observed near secured infrastructure. We have a duty to shareholders, to project partners, to facts, which you'll give me time to establish. Pull complete revision history on that file. Every touch, every timestamp, every modification. And preserve security footage for Friday evening, 6 to 7 p.m. Philip nodded as if the suggestion had originated with him rather than arrived as demand. Of course, transparency serves everyone. HR cleared their throat with the delicacy of people navigating minefields. Standard protocol places Mr. Cole on paid leave for 10 business days while we conduct investigation. That gives everyone space to. Fine, 10 days. But I want external forensics review, not just internal IT. If there's manipulation, I'll find it. After the meeting dispersed, Philip lingered near the windows where Manhattan sprawled below, like a game board he'd been playing longer than Victoria had been alive. His voice dropped to conversational register, the tone reserved for moments when witnesses became inconvenient. You understand this isn't personal. We have fiduciary obligations that transcend individual employees. Victoria met his gaze with the control she'd learned from years of boardroom combat. And I have obligations that transcend quarterly returns. We'll let the investigation establish what happened. Then we'll discuss obligations. The facility's office occupied basement space where fluorescent lights hummed their perpetual discomfort and the smell of industrial cleaning solution mixed with machine oil to create an atmosphere of functional honesty. Marcus stood with a suspension notice in his hands, reading the words twice as if repetition might rearrange their meaning. His supervisor delivered the news with the resignation of someone who'd seen this play before and knew how it ended. Marcus's hands trembled as he folded the paper, muscle memory from courtrooms and false accusations flooding his nervous system with chemicals designed for fighting or fleeing. I didn't take anything. I checked delivery manifests on that floor. That's why I accessed the emergency directory. That's my job. The supervisor's sympathy arrived genuine but powerless. It's paid leave, Cole. Just sit tight while they sort it out. But sitting tight required breathing normally, and Marcus's chest had tightened with the familiar pressure of panic attacks that arrived uninvited and stayed until they finished their work. The basement walls contracted in his peripheral vision, sounds amplified and distorted. His mind supplied images from 3 years prior. Dave Patterson testifying with practiced lies, the jury's faces arranged in judgment, the gavel falling like execution. He counted backward from 20, named objects he could identify without looking, forced his lungs to accept air in measured intervals. The grounding technique he'd taught Emma Stone in that elevator now served as lifeline in a different kind of stuck space, though this one came without rescue protocols or voices promising safety through metal doors. The parking garage existed in perpetual twilight, concrete and exhaust fumes, and the echo of footsteps that announced arrivals before their owners became visible. Marcus loaded tools into his pickup with movements slowed by the weight of implications he couldn't yet calculate fully. The suspension meant 10 days away from work that kept Noah housed and fed. The investigation meant scrutiny that would excavate his past and display it for people who measured worth in credentials rather than competence. Victoria found him there, her heels clicking advance warning before she rounded the pillar. Her expression carried the kind of concern that made everything worse by acknowledging it existed. "You're not leaving, are you?" Marcus set down the tool bag, buying seconds to arrange words into sentences that wouldn't reveal how close he'd come to panic in the basement. "Not tonight, but they told me I'm on suspension pending investigation. 10 days. They told you why they're really doing this?" "Just that I accessed files above my clearance level. But we both know what this is. Someone's uncomfortable with me being visible here." Victoria stepped closer, and Marcus recognized the shift in her posture from employer to something else he couldn't quite name. "This isn't coincidence. Philip Ashford sees you as a threat." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying edges sharp enough to cut. "A threat? I'm maintenance. I fix things that break and try not to make them worse. What possible threat could I pose to a managing partner with 200 million in play? The kind that can't be bought or intimidated. The kind that solves problems investors can't solve with money. The kind my daughter trusts more than men with graduate degrees and equity stakes." The words landed with implications Marcus couldn't afford to examine while standing in a parking garage with his employment status uncertain and his son waiting at home with homework questions that presumed stable futures. He gripped the truck bed, knuckles white against steel. "Victoria, this is exactly what I was afraid of. Now you have board pressure, investor concerns, and you're defending someone who mops floors because I happen to know some engineering. When does the cost become too high?" Her voice dropped to the register she used for truths instead of negotiations. "I don't know. I'm terrified this will hurt Emma. I'm terrified I'm making the wrong choice. But I'm more terrified of teaching her that powerful people can lie and we just let them because fighting back is expensive." First time Marcus had heard her admit fear openly, stripping away the CEO armor to reveal the person underneath who carried burdens nobody photographed for business magazines. He saw the weight she'd been carrying alone. The company Matthew built, the daughter she was raising, the investors who measured her decisions in percentages while she measured them in lives housed and families sheltered. Emma's voice echoed from the stairwell before Marcus could formulate response, her arrival perfectly timed or possibly orchestrated by forces beyond coincidence. She appeared with Noah beside her, both children wearing the expression of people who just solved mysteries adults were still pretending didn't exist. "Mr. Cole, Mom said you're on vacation." Marcus crouched to her level, arranging his expression into something approximating normal. "Something like that, kiddo." Emma studied him with the directness that made adults uncomfortable. "Did someone lie about you?" The question arrived without preamble or cushioning, delivered with the certainty of someone who'd already performed the calculations and reached conclusions. Marcus felt something crack in his chest. "Why would you think that?" "Because good people get blamed for stuff they didn't do. It's easier than admitting the bad people are bad." Noah nodded agreement. These 8 and 10-year-olds dispensing wisdom that should have belonged to people 3 times their age. Marcus looked up at Victoria over Emma's head, finding her eyes already on him with expression that suggested she'd just heard the same verdict he had. Days 1 through 3 passed in the particular purgatory of forced inactivity. Victoria hired Cybertrace Security, a firm discreet enough to investigate without alerting the board and expensive enough to find truth regardless of where it hid. Their lead investigator listened to her concerns with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd seen corporate warfare disguised as protocol violations often enough to recognize the patterns. His assessment arrived clinical. "If there's digital manipulation, we'll locate it. But forensics takes time. Can't rush the analysis without compromising integrity." Victoria authorized payment from personal accounts rather than corporate budgets, another choice that would raise questions if discovered, but kept investigation results under her control rather than the board's. The investigator promised progress reports every 48 hours and began the work of translating ones and zeros into evidence that might save Marcus's job or reveal Victoria's judgment had been compromised by factors she didn't want examined too closely. Day 4 delivered consequences in the form of Noah arriving home from school with a black eye swelling shut and blood crusted under his nose. Marcus met him at the door, alarms spiking before his son could explain injuries that spoke their own language about playgrounds transformed into battlefields. Noah's words came thick through split lip. Kids said you're a gold digger, that you're dating Emma's mom for money. The pain in Marcus's chest had nothing to do with physical injury and everything to do with watching his son carry burdens created by adult choices and malicious assumptions. He pulled Noah close, careful of injuries, fury rising hot enough to override the anxiety that had been his constant companion for days. Did you fight back? I told them you're an engineer, not a janitor. They laughed. So I hit Tyler Morrison. Marcus should have delivered lecture about violence solving nothing, about using words instead of fists, about being better than people who reduced complex humans to single labels. But looking at his 8-year-old son, who defended his father's honor with the only tools available to third graders, Marcus felt something darker than parental disappointment. He grabbed his keys, Noah protesting, "Dad, don't!" The elementary school principal occupied an office designed to communicate authority through furniture selection and wall placement of diplomas earned from institutions that mattered in conversations about educational philosophy. Marcus burst through the door without appointment or warning, his voice carrying volume he hadn't accessed since courtroom defenses fell apart under perjured testimony. His words came fast and sharp. Your students are bullying my son because of what his father does for a living, because I work maintenance instead of wearing suits. And when he defended himself, you suspended him? The principal stood, hands raised in gestures meant to de-escalate situations where parents cross lines. Mr. Cole, please calm. Calm. My son has a black eye because I tried to do the right thing and it cost me my career. Now he's paying the price for my choices. And you want me calm? Noah's small hand gripped Marcus's arm, his voice cutting through rage with the clarity of children who understood when adults needed saving from themselves. Dad, don't. It makes it worse. Marcus stopped, recognition flooding cold over the heat of his anger. His son had become the adult in this moment, the one maintaining control while Marcus lost it, the one protecting them both from consequences that rage would guarantee. Shame washed through him with physical force. He looked down at Noah. I'm sorry, buddy. The principal's voice softened into something closer to understanding. Mr. Cole, I'll address the bullying, but the fighting still violated school policy. Noah's suspension stands, but I'll make sure the other children face equal consequences. Marcus drove home in silence, Noah watching him from the passenger seat with concern that should have belonged to parents worried about children rather than the reverse. Back in their apartment, Marcus pulled his son close. I shouldn't have lost control like that. You were right. It made things worse. Noah's response carried forgiveness Marcus didn't deserve. You were just scared for me. That's what dads do. Day 6 found Marcus drafting a resignation letter at his kitchen table, the words forming despite his intention to resist them. Dear Mrs. Stone, effective immediately, I resign my position at Stone Development Corporation. The sentence sat incomplete, cursor blinking where reasons should follow, because defending me costs you too much, because my presence creates problems you don't need, because staying would be selfish when leaving would solve everything except the part where I'd be proving all of them right. Noah appeared in the doorway, sleep disheveled, reading over Marcus's shoulder with the literacy that came from being raised by a single parent who'd never learned to hide struggles effectively. You're not quitting, are you? Marcus closed the laptop, just thinking through options. Thinking or giving up, because there's a difference. The observation came from somewhere beyond 8 years of life experience, pulled from watching his father navigate setbacks and maintain integrity even when it cost him security. Noah had learned lessons Marcus hadn't meant to teach, about standing in truth when lies would be easier, about not running from fights even when retreat would be safer. Marcus pulled his son onto his lap. You're right, we don't run from lies. We stand in truth until it wins. Noah settled against his chest. Mrs. Stone is hiring detectives. Emma told me. She doesn't believe the file thing. Day 7 brought Emma and Noah together at the public library. A meeting arranged through text messages their parents didn't monitor and wouldn't have approved if they had. The children occupied a table in the reference section, surrounded by books neither planned to read, conducting operations that belonged in different narratives. Emma spoke first, her voice library quiet but carrying conviction. My mom's hiring detectives. She doesn't believe your dad stole anything. Noah's relief showed in the way his shoulders dropped. My dad thinks he should leave so you guys don't get hurt by this. That's stupid. We're already a team. You can't just quit teams because things get hard. My dad says teams need proof, not just feelings. Otherwise, it's just hoping stuff works out. Emma considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then we find proof. And they bent their heads together, two children deciding that if adults couldn't solve problems fast enough, perhaps smaller people with different perspectives might see angles that age and experience had trained others to miss. Their planning would bear fruit in ways neither could predict, but both would enable. Days 8 and 9 delivered breakthrough disguised as technical specifications. Cybertrace Security's lead investigator called Victoria at home after business hours with findings that transformed suspicion into documentation. His report arrived detailed. We found the anomaly. File moved twice by Ashford credential at 6:41 and 6:43 Friday evening. Cole's access at 6:48 was read only to an emergency shared folder. Someone placed the file in shared space, then reported it missing. Classic frame-up methodology. Victoria felt vindication and fury compete for dominance. Can you prove intent? We need external corroboration. Camera footage would help, but without views inside the server room, we're limited. Device logs from anyone who might have been monitoring the shared folder would be stronger. Date stamped, difficult to fake, automatically generated. Victoria authorized camera footage enhancement, knowing the building's security system captured hallways but not server room interiors. A design choice meant to protect sensitive infrastructure, but now serving to obscure evidence she needed. The footage showed Philip Ashford entering the server corridor at 6:39 with an assistant carrying a laptop, exiting at 6:44. Marcus appeared in the hallway at 6:48, checked something on his tablet, departed. Neither man entered the server room on camera, but only one had the access credentials that matched file movement timestamps. Circumstantial, suggestive, insufficient for the kind of public accusation that would end Philip's influence permanently. Victoria needed something irrefutable, evidence so clear that denial became impossible and damage control became Philip's only option. Victoria's penthouse kitchen island served double duty as homework station and impromptu headquarters for operations she hadn't authorized but couldn't quite bring herself to stop. Emma and Noah spread their schoolwork across granite countertops, performing the careful dance of children who'd learned that looking busy kept adults from asking too many questions about what they were actually doing. Noah pulled out Marcus's old tablet, a hand-me-down device Marcus had kept synced to building systems for emergency documentation access, something maintenance supervisors needed but rarely used outside genuine crises. Noah powered it on to download a game, or so the story would go if Victoria asked, but Emma's sharp eyes caught something neither child had anticipated finding. A notification banner appeared, timestamp from Friday evening, system alert that had logged automatically when Noah's tablet connected to building Wi-Fi, Stone Projects shared folder updated by P. Ashford, Friday 6:42 p.m. Emma's gasp drew Victoria from the living room where she'd been reviewing quarterly projections that mattered considerably less than whatever had just caused her daughter to grip Noah's arm hard enough to leave marks. Emma's voice carried the triumph of people who just solved equations their teachers hadn't assigned. Mom, Noah found something. Victoria crossed to the island, professional skepticism competing with parental instinct that suggested these children had somehow accomplished what her hired investigators hadn't. Noah turned the tablet toward her, the notification still glowing with timestamp precision. 6:42 p.m. File Atrium Rev Final, updated by P. Ashford. The significance hit Victoria with the force of evidence that wouldn't crumble under cross-examination. If Philip had updated the file at 6:42, during the window he claimed it was stolen, and Marcus had accessed the shared folder at 6:48, then Marcus had only seen the file after Philip placed it there. The frame-up acquired shape and detail, transforming from theory into documented fact, with automatic timestamps that no one could claim had been fabricated. Victoria reached for her phone, dialing the forensics investigator. I have external device logs showing Ashford updated the file at 6:42, automatically generated, date stamped from a third-party device that was passively monitoring the shared folder. The investigator's response carried the satisfaction of people whose suspicions had just received confirmation. Combined with our access logs and camera footage, that establishes intent to frame. He manufactured the incident, then reported Cole for accessing the location where he'd placed the evidence. Can I use this? In court, absolutely. In your boardroom, depends how ruthless you're willing to be. Victoria looked at Emma and Noah, these children who'd found justice through accident and determination, who'd solved adult problems with tools adults had overlooked. Emma's expression held questions Victoria didn't quite know how to answer. Not about the evidence, but about what came next. About whether proving Marcus innocent would be enough, or whether larger battles loomed on horizons Victoria couldn't quite make out yet. Noah's voice arrived small and worried. Is my dad in trouble? Victoria knelt to his level, meeting eyes that carried too much concern for 8 years. Your dad was never in trouble, but the person who tried to make him look bad is. Emma's wisdom emerged again, channeling lessons Victoria had taught without quite realizing their daughter had been cataloging them for future application. Mom, this is like when you taught me about bullies. You can't just make them stop once. You have to show everyone what they did so they can't do it again. The observation landed with the weight of strategy Victoria hadn't fully formed, but recognized as correct once Emma named it. Private resolution would leave Philip in position to try again, to find new ways of removing threats he couldn't control. Public accountability required public forum, which meant the annual investor retreat at Lakeshore, where Philip would be hosting and Victoria would be arriving with evidence that would transform hospitality into confrontation. The Lakeshore Executive Retreat occupied upstate acreage, where old money gathered annually to discuss portfolios while pretending the weekend represented casual social time rather than calculated networking. The lodge smelled like cedar and carefully maintained tradition, stone fireplaces large enough to stand in, leather furniture that spoke to masculine comfort and feminine exclusion in equal measure. Philip Ashford's firm sponsored the event, which meant he controlled guest lists, seating arrangements, and the subtle hierarchies that determined whose opinions mattered in unrecorded conversations that shaped policy more than official meetings ever did. Victoria arrived knowing her presence would register as either bravery or stupidity, depending on how the next 48 hours unfolded. She carried evidence in her briefcase, forensics reports, camera footage, Noah's tablet with its damning notification, and uncertainty about whether deploying it publicly would save Marcus or destroy what remained of her professional relationships with investors who valued stability over justice. Friday evening's social hour filled the lodge's main room with investors performing casualness in expensive sportswear, discussing markets and opportunities with the practiced ease of people who'd learned to make warfare look like friendship. Philip approached Victoria near the bar, his smile carrying warmth that didn't quite reach calculation in his eyes. Glad you came. We should discuss Midtown Tower next steps, assuming the security concerns have been resolved satisfactorily. Victoria's response arrived cool enough to lower the ambient temperature. Security concerns are resolved. Very clearly, we'll discuss it tomorrow. Publicly. Philip's expression flickered. Surprise, recalculation, the swift adjustment of people who played long games and recognized when opponents stopped playing defense. He recovered smoothly. Looking forward to it, transparency serves everyone's interest. Saturday morning's investor breakfast assembled 40 people in the dining room, where large windows frame mountain views and smaller conversations frame futures. Philip presented quarterly portfolio updates with the confidence of someone who controlled the room through invested capital and strategic relationships. He outlined returns, discussed market positioning, gestured toward growth opportunities that would benefit everyone present if they maintained course and avoided unnecessary disruptions. Victoria waded through his presentation, through the polite applause that greeted financial projections, through the transition to questions and discussion that represented her opening. She stood, and the room's attention shifted with the uncertainty of people sensing drama without knowing its source yet. Her voice carried the boardroom authority she'd spent years developing. Before we move to next quarter projections, I need to address the security incident Philip raised regarding document theft. The room achieved the particular silence of people recognizing entertainment or disaster depending on perspective. Philip's posture straightened, his expression arranging itself into concern that looked rehearsed. Victoria, that's already been handled through proper channels. No need to, I disagree. Transparency matters, especially regarding false accusations against employees. She retrieved her tablet, connected it to the presentation screen, and methodically displayed the evidence she'd compiled. IT logs showing file movement by P. Ashford credential at 6:41 and 6:43. Camera footage showing Philip entering the server quarter at 6:39. Noah's tablet notification confirming Philip updated the file at 6:42 during the window he claimed it was stolen. M. Cole's access at 6:48 to a shared emergency folder, read only, after Philip had already placed and removed the file. Victoria's narration stripped away ambiguity. Marcus Cole never moved that file. He accessed a shared folder while performing his job checking delivery manifests. Someone manufactured this incident to justify removing him from the building. Whispers erupted like small fires across the room, investors recalculating relationships and liabilities, while Philip's face hardened into something less performative. His response came measured. That's a serious accusation based on automatically generated timestamps from 3 independent systems: access logs, security cameras, passive device monitoring. The question isn't whether someone framed Cole. The question is why. Board chair Margaret shifted in her seat, discomfort visible in posture. Victoria, this is inappropriate venue for personnel. Victoria turned toward her with the expression reserved for people who'd chosen convenience over justice. Philip made it public when he reported the incident to the board and demanded suspension without completed investigation. I'm providing the investigation results. Turns out the security breach came from inside our investor group, not our maintenance staff. Philip stood, abandoning the pretense of cooperative dialogue. You're making this personal. Investors don't appreciate governance compromised by relationships that cloud judgment. The accusation landed in open space, naming what everyone had been thinking, but nobody had voiced directly. Victoria felt the room's energy shift, calculations being performed about whether her defense of Marcus represented principled leadership or emotional compromise. She met Philip's challenge directly. What I won't appreciate are investors manipulating company resources to remove employees who inconvenience them. Marcus Cole solved a problem you couldn't solve, Philip. He saved Riverton with expertise you didn't possess. And when he became visible doing work that mattered, you tried to eliminate him using corporate infrastructure and false accusations. That's not governance, that's abuse of power. The private investigator's supplementary report appeared on screen. The section Victoria had been saving for moments when Philip thought he controlled the narrative. Custody battle documentation. Ex-wife's legal filings, lawyers' depositions describing Philip's pathological need for control, his inability to tolerate independence in others, his pattern of eliminating perceived threats through calculated campaigns. Victoria's voice softened into something more dangerous than anger. You saw Marcus as a threat because he represents something you can't buy or control. Competence that exists without credentials. Respect earned through character rather than investment portfolios. You projected your own custody battle onto my company, trying to eliminate an outsider who reminded you that money doesn't guarantee authority over everyone. Philip's retreat came strategic rather than emotional, the calculated surrender of someone recognizing when battles couldn't be won. Perhaps there was miscommunication. If Cole was simply doing his job, we can certainly reinstate. It's not about reinstatement. It's about accountability. You used your position as major investor to frame an innocent employee. That violates fiduciary duty and exposes Stone Development to lawsuits we'd lose. Legal has already compiled the evidence. You can resign from the board now with a quiet announcement, or I can release findings to the SEC and let them investigate securities violations related to your coordination with former investors to manipulate our stock price during the suspension period. The room absorbed this information in stages, some investors already performing the calculations about how Philip's departure would affect their positions, others evaluating whether Victoria's hardline stance represented strength or vindictiveness that might target them next. Margaret cleared her throat. This requires executive session discussion. No, it requires Philip's resignation. Today, or it requires SEC involvement. Those are the options. Philip held her gaze, searching for bluff he wouldn't find. Victoria had spent the drive upstate running scenarios, and every path that didn't end with Philip's removal led to future incidents where investors would test whether she valued employees or capital more. Some choices define leadership more permanently than quarterly results, establishing precedents that would govern all future decisions. Philip's voice came quiet, defeat disguised as dignity. I'll draft my resignation this afternoon, effective immediately. Victoria watched him leave the dining room, feeling victory's weight instead of its triumph. She hadn't wanted to destroy Philip's career, had hoped for acknowledgement and course correction that would allow everyone to move forward with lessons learned, but relationships intact. But Philip had forced the choice between protecting Marcus and protecting investor relationships, and Victoria had chosen the person who fixed elevators over the one who funded them. Later, standing on the lodge's deck while other investors avoided her with the careful distance of people reassessing alliances, Victoria called Marcus. His voice answered wary. Victoria. Philip resigned from the board. The suspension is lifted. You're cleared with full back pay and formal apology from HR. Silence stretched long enough that Victoria checked her phone to confirm the connection held. When Marcus spoke, his words came thick. What did you have to give up to make that happen? 2 investors pulled their stakes. The board wants an emergency meeting Monday to discuss my judgment, and Philip's threatening to take 3 others with him, which would cost us about $180 million in committed capital. Then maybe I should. Don't tell me you should step back or disappear or make this easier by removing yourself. You were framed, you were cleared, and I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen just because it's expensive to do the right thing. Marcus's exhale carried through the phone line. Noah got suspended from school for fighting. Kids called me a gold digger. Said I'm using you for money. He defended me with fists because he's 8 and doesn't have better tools yet. Every day I stay visible in your world, he pays the price. Victoria gripped the deck railing, looking out at mountains that didn't care about human complications. Then we make it stop being my world and your world. We make it our world, where Noah and Emma don't have to choose sides because there aren't sides anymore. But that's only possible if you don't run. I'm not running, not anymore. If you're willing to stand, I'll stand with you, even when it costs something. Especially then. Noah asked me what integrity means. I told him it's doing the right thing when it costs you something. I can't teach him that and then bail the first time it's expensive. The words settled into Victoria's chest like foundation stones, the kind that supported buildings through earthquakes and storms. She'd spent 4 years building walls out of work and grief, convincing herself that providing for Emma meant sacrificing emotional presence for financial security. Marcus had just named the lie. Integrity required showing up when showing up was hard, staying when leaving would be easier, choosing principle over convenience, even when convenience would solve immediate problems. Monday arrived with Marcus back at Stone Development, tool belt restored, and suspension formally ended. Victoria met him at the employee entrance, needing to see his face when she delivered news that felt both like victory and warning. Suspension lifted, full back pay, HR sending formal apology. Marcus studied her expression, reading underneath the professional update. And the cost? Board meeting this afternoon. They want my plan for managing investor concerns. Philip's already working behind scenes to pull support. Margaret called it either brilliant or suicidal, and I'm not sure she's decided which. Victoria, this is exactly what I was afraid of. You're fighting battles you wouldn't have to fight if I chose differently. If I prioritize investor comfort over employee protection, if I taught Emma that powerful people can lie and we just accept it because fighting back is expensive. They stood in the entrance alcove where morning light cut through glass doors and early shift workers navigated around them with the careful distance of people sensing significance without knowing its details. Marcus looked at her fully, and Victoria saw the fear beneath his composure. The PTSD fueled anxiety that told him good things didn't last and people in power eventually betrayed you. His voice came rough. I don't want to be the reason you lose what Matthew built. You're not the reason, they are. Philip, the investors who value control over competence. The board members who want me to manage optics instead of doing what's right. You're just the excuse they're using. Emma and Noah appeared from the building lobby, both children somehow present despite school schedules that should have kept them elsewhere. Emma carried papers that looked suspiciously like the morning's front page, and Noah held his tablet like evidence at trial. Emma spoke first. The newspaper wrote about what happened at the retreat. They're calling you brave. Victoria took the paper, skimming headlines that transformed private investor meetings into public narrative. Stone CEO stands by wrongly accused employee despite investor pressure. The article had quotes from anonymous sources, details that suggested someone at Lakeshore had spoken to press, probably multiple someones with competing agendas about how this story should be told. Noah looked up at Marcus. Are you coming home tonight or do you have to work late? The question carried implications Victoria hadn't quite processed yet. The assumption of coming home, as if living arrangements had shifted without formal discussion, as if Emma and Noah had already decided what adults were still negotiating. Marcus glanced at Victoria with expression asking permission for something neither of them had defined yet. Victoria found herself nodding. We should probably all have dinner together. Talk about what happens next. The Stone Tower Ballroom had been transformed for an evening that Victoria had planned as controlled revelation, but now felt like public sentencing. 6 weeks had passed since the Lakeshore confrontation. 6 weeks of investor calls and board negotiations and media speculation about whether the CEO who'd defended a maintenance worker would survive long enough to see if her principles produced profits or just headlines. Tonight was meant to bring resolution. The 5 original candidates, Elliot, Dr. Bell, Grant, Lua, Raphael, stood in evening wear that announced their suitability for formal occasions and families that valued appearances. Select media occupied designated areas with cameras that would document whatever happened for consumption by audiences who confused observation with participation. Board members clustered near exits, their presence suggesting they expected outcomes worth witnessing or disasters worth avoiding. Possibly both. Marcus arrived in a suit borrowed from Ray Thompson, his maintenance mentor, who'd been the same size 30 years prior, and whose taste in formal wear suggested different decades. The fit was close enough to pass in dim lighting, distant enough that Marcus looked like someone wearing a costume rather than comfortable in his own clothing. Noah stood beside his father in his only dress shirt, the one they'd bought for his grandfather's funeral and which now barely reached his wrist because 8-year-olds grew faster than budgets allowed for wardrobe updates. Emma found them near the entrance, her dress silver like her mother's, her expression carrying the determination of people who'd made decisions and wouldn't be persuaded toward different ones. She took Noah's hand with the naturalness of children who hadn't learned yet that some connections required permission from authorities who measured suitability in metrics beyond mutual trust. Victoria stood at the small stage, looking out at the assembled witnesses to whatever she was about to do. The plan had been simple 6 weeks ago. Let Emma share her thoughts on family, provide closure to the selection process, demonstrate that CEO decisions could include emotional intelligence without sacrificing professional judgment. But the plan had been designed for a version of events where Marcus remained invisible, where choosing someone from the approved list would satisfy expectations while proving Victoria could make personal choices without disrupting corporate stability. That version had died at Lakeshore when she'd chosen protecting Marcus over protecting investor relationships. Now she stood at a podium with cameras recording, and Elliot preparing his pitch about stability and partnership and all the reasonable things that looked perfect on paper and felt empty in practice. Elliot went first, his voice carrying the practiced charm of courtroom closings. Victoria, I can offer you stability, legal expertise, a partnership where your professional demands and personal needs don't compete. Dr. Bell followed with empathy-forward messaging. I understand the demands of your work because I face similar pressures. Healthcare and housing both require balancing human needs with systemic realities. I can offer Emma a home where compassion and competence coexist. Grant delivered his pitch like market analysis. Financial security for Emma's future. Networks that open doors she doesn't even know exist yet. Strategic partnership that strengthens both our positions. Lewis spoke about building beautiful lives the way he built beautiful buildings, finding harmony between form and function. Raphael emphasized family connection and hospitality empire resources that could provide stability and adventure in equal measure. Each man presented reasonable arguments for their suitability. None of them talked about being a father. They discussed what they'd provide Victoria, what benefits Emma would receive through association, what their partnership would mean for Stone development and its stakeholders. They pitched marriages as mergers, family formation as strategic alliance. Emma took the microphone without waiting for invitation or permission, her small hands gripping the stand designed for adults twice her height. She looked out at the assembled audience with the directness that made grown people uncomfortable. Thank you all for the nice words. You're all successful and accomplished and probably good at your jobs. The pause stretched long enough that people shifted in their seats, recognizing transition coming, but unsure of its direction. Emma's voice strengthened, but none of you talked about being a dad. You talked about what you'd give my ma or our company or my future. You didn't talk about making pancakes on Sunday or fixing squeaky doors or telling me when I'm wrong in ways that help me do better, instead of making me feel small. Victoria felt her throat tighten, watching her daughter articulate truths she'd been avoiding in service of plans that looked good in frameworks, but ignored what actually mattered. Emma had been cataloging the difference between men who fit criteria and men who fit their lives, between candidates who checked boxes and people who showed up when elevators stuck. Emma walked toward the back of the ballroom, her path deliberate. I need someone who doesn't panic when things break because he knows how to fix them. Someone who makes moms smile in ways that aren't about work or money or appearing successful for cameras. Someone like Mr. Cole. The room erupted in gasps and camera flashes and whispered speculations about whether this was planned theater or unscripted disaster. Philip's replacement on the board stood with expression suggesting this confirmed every concern about Victoria's judgment being compromised. Margaret's face registered something closer to sympathy mixed with resignation, recognizing that some choices couldn't be unmade once 10-year-olds named them in front of investors and media. Victoria moved toward Emma, toward Marcus, toward the decision her daughter had just made public in ways that eliminated retreat as option. She reached them near the back tables where Marcus stood frozen between wanting to flee and wanting to stay. Noah gripping his hand like anchor, preventing escape. Victoria's voice carried to microphones designed to capture moments exactly like this. 4 months ago, I thought this was about finding someone who fit my world. Someone whose credentials and connections would make sense to boards and investors and people who measure suitability in resumes and portfolios. She looked at Marcus, meeting eyes that held fear and hope in measures she couldn't quantify. But Emma's right. I've been solving the wrong problem. This isn't about finding someone who fits my world. It's about finding someone who fits our life. And Marcus Cole has done more for my family and my company in 4 months than most could manage in 4 years. He saved projects with expertise investors couldn't buy. He showed my daughter that kindness is strength and competence doesn't require credentials. He reminded me what it feels like to trust someone completely. The admission hung in air conditioned to exactly 72 degrees, while 40 investors recalculated valuations, and 3 board members composed resignation letters, and Emma and Noah watched adults navigate consequences of choices children had forced into public view. Marcus found his voice, though it came quieter than Victoria's had. I know this isn't how you wanted this to happen. Victoria took his hand, feeling calluses from tools and work that kept buildings standing. I didn't know how I wanted it to happen. I just knew I wanted this. You, Emma and Noah, something real instead of something that looks right in press releases. Margaret approached while cameras documented the moment, her expression carrying the weight of emergency meetings about to be scheduled. Emergency board session tomorrow morning, Victoria. They'll want your plan for addressing investor concerns and media response. Well, Victoria didn't release Marcus's hand. Tell them my plan is to keep running the company the way I've always run it, with integrity even when it's expensive. If that's not acceptable, I'll hear their proposals for alternative leadership. But I won't pretend Marcus doesn't exist to make stock prices comfortable. The immediate aftermath divided cleanly between people who applauded principles regardless of costs and people who calculated costs regardless of principles. One investor approached to confirm his stake withdrawal, citing fiduciary concerns about leadership judgment. Another expressed support for authentic decision-making in industry too focused on appearances. Margaret promised the board meeting would be difficult but survivable, though her definition of survival seemed to include significant concessions Victoria hadn't agreed to yet. Marcus and Noah left early, avoiding media questions neither wanted to answer, but not before Emma extracted promises about weekend plans that assumed futures the adults hadn't quite confirmed existed. Victoria stood in the emptying ballroom, watching staff clear glasses and fold chairs, transforming the space back into neutral territory that could host different events with different outcomes. Nora appeared beside her, carrying 2 glasses of wine nobody had ordered. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen you do or the most reckless. I'm honestly not sure which. Victoria accepted the wine. Neither am I. But it felt less reckless than pretending I could separate who I am from who I choose. Emma saw that before I did. She recognized that all the criteria I developed for measuring suitability were measuring the wrong things. The board's going to fight you on this. Philip's already making calls, pulling investors, building narrative that you've compromised judgment for a relationship that makes the company look unprofessional. Then we'll see whether I built something strong enough to survive being led by someone who prioritizes people over portfolios. If I didn't, maybe it's not worth preserving anyway. The words felt more confident than Victoria's actual certainty justified, but sometimes leadership required projecting conviction while privately harboring doubts that kept sleep elusive and decisions provisional. She'd just bet her company, her reputation, and Emma's inheritance on the possibility that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the comfortable thing. Tomorrow's board meeting would reveal whether that bet had been wisdom or self-destruction, dressed in principles that sounded better than they functioned in practice. Tuesday morning's boardroom carried the weight of verdict before trial concluded. 9 board members occupied chairs arranged with geometric precision around polished oak that reflected fluorescent overhead lighting in ways that suggested interrogation more than collaboration. Margaret sat at the head position, her expression neutral in that practiced way corporate veterans learn when preparing to deliver bad news they'd rather avoid, but couldn't. Stock charts projected across the wall told their story in red descending lines. 12% drop since the ballroom event 6 days prior. 3 major investors had withdrawn commitments totaling $180 million. 2 board members had submitted resignations citing irreconcilable differences with current leadership direction. Employee retention metrics showed 15% improvement, but nobody in this room measured success in worker satisfaction when shareholder value declined. Margaret opened without preamble, her voice carrying the efficiency of someone who'd conducted these conversations before and knew how they ended. Victoria, we need to discuss your relationship with Marcus Cole and its impact on Stone Development's market position and investor confidence. The numbers followed: stock decline, withdrawn capital, institutional investor concerns expressed through carefully worded letters that questioned whether personal relationships were compromising professional judgment. One board member leaned forward with the urgency of people protecting portfolios. We've spent decades building a brand synonymous with excellence and reliability. Recent events have introduced volatility that threatens that carefully constructed reputation. Another added weight to the argument: major institutional investors are asking whether Stone Development is a serious company or a vehicle for personal narratives that belong in different contexts. That's a question we can't afford to leave ambiguous. Victoria absorbed the assault with the composure she'd learned from years defending budgets and timelines against people who measured everything in quarterly increments. But beneath professional armor, fear coiled tight. The recognition that they might actually force her to choose between the company Matthew built and the life Emma had demanded she build alongside it. Margaret's tone softened into something approximating sympathy. No one's asking you to end anything immediately, but strategic distance, clear separation between personal and professional spheres, some public acknowledgement that Victoria's interruption arrived sharp, that I'll pretend Marcus doesn't exist so stock prices recover, that I'll demonstrate leadership by hiding relationships that make investors uncomfortable. The board member, who'd raised reputation concerns, tried diplomacy. We're asking you to prioritize 400 employees whose livelihoods depend on this company's financial stability over a personal connection that, however meaningful to you, creates market uncertainty. And I'm asking you to remember why this company exists. We build housing for people others overlook. We create communities in neighborhoods investors ignore because returns don't meet arbitrary thresholds. When did we become the institution that overlooks people based on credentials instead of character? Silence settled heavy while board members exchanged glances that communicated strategies Victoria couldn't decode, but recognized as coordinated. Margaret cleared her throat. We've taken a preliminary vote, 7-2 in favor of implementing structural changes. You'd remain CEO, but with oversight committee review of major decisions. Personal life would be maintained separately from corporate events and public communications about company direction. The translation arrived clear. Keep Marcus, but surrender authority, maintain title while losing power, become figurehead leadership while others actually governed. Victoria felt the trap close around options that had seemed broader before this meeting began. Philip's influence remained visible even in his absence, his carefully placed calls to investors and board members producing exactly the pressure campaign he'd orchestrated to force this moment. He'd lost his seat but retained enough connections to damage Victoria's position from outside, proving that some battles couldn't be won by being right when opponents controlled enough resources to make rightness irrelevant. Victoria stood, the motion drawing attention, because people seated in boardrooms maintained that position until meetings concluded or they'd been dismissed. Her voice carried the certainty of decisions made before their full costs became visible. Here's my counter-proposal. Give me 90 days. If stock hasn't recovered and if we haven't secured new investors who understand that authentic leadership creates long-term value even when it costs short-term comfort, I'll resign as CEO. You can find someone whose personal life doesn't create market volatility. The board absorbed this offer in stages, some members recognizing it as capitulation, disguised as negotiation, others understanding it as Victoria calling their bluff by making termination her choice rather than theirs. Margaret's expression shifted towards something resembling respect. You'd give up the company rather than separate your personal choices from professional obligations? I'd give up the title. But I won't give up the principle that people matter more than portfolios, that character counts more than credentials, that doing right things costs something, and that cost is worth paying. Board member 2 shook his head. That's either incredibly brave or professionally suicidal. It's both. I learned from Marcus that integrity means doing the right thing when it costs you something. I can't teach Emma that principle and then abandon it the first time it's expensive. The 90-day clock started ticking immediately, each day a countdown toward either vindication or unemployment. Victoria left the boardroom knowing she'd just wagered everything Matthew had built on the possibility that values produce results even when markets initially punish them. Some choices define leaders more permanently than quarterly earnings, establishing whether principles survive contact with consequences or dissolved under pressure from people who measured worth in different currencies. The media siege began Tuesday afternoon and escalated through rhythms Victoria recognized from previous crises, but had never experienced as primary target. Photographers camped outside Stone Development headquarters. Reporters called her cell phone somehow obtained through sources she couldn't identify. Headlines multiplied across platforms that treated corporate governance like soap opera. CEO gambles empire on janitor romance. Stone Development stocks tumble as leader chooses hard over profit. Modern fairy tale or corporate disaster? Victoria's mother arrived at the penthouse Wednesday evening without invitation, carrying opinions she'd been restraining through phone calls that Victoria had been avoiding. Evelyn Stone represented old money and older values, her world built on foundations where appearances determine reality and personal choices remain private, specifically because making them public invited exactly the kind of scrutiny Victoria now faced. Evelyn's opening carried the disappointment of parents watching children make mistakes they'd warned against. Darling, I've watched you build this company from Matthew's small firm into something that matters. Don't destroy it for sentiment that feels meaningful now, but won't sustain you when the board forces you out. Victoria poured tea she wouldn't drink. It's not sentiment, Mother, it's truth. Marcus is competent, honest, good with Emma. Those qualities matter more than whether he fits expectations about who belongs at galas and investor dinners. Truth doesn't pay employees when the company fails. It doesn't fund Emma's education when your board removes you for choosing relationships over responsibilities. The argument continued through cycles Victoria had rehearsed mentally, but found harder when confronting actual parent rather than imagined opposition. Evelyn deployed every weapon available. Matthew's memory invoked as evidence Victoria was betraying his legacy. Emma's future described in scenarios where mother's choices cost daughter her inheritance. Corporate duty framed as obligation that transcended personal preference. But Victoria held ground with stubbornness inherited from the same woman currently attacking it. Matthew built this company on the principle that housing people mattered more than maximizing returns. He chose projects others ignored because families needed homes, not because profit margins looked attractive. I'm choosing people over portfolios the same way he did. The only difference is I'm choosing someone who didn't die conveniently before anyone could judge whether the choice was wise. Evelyn's expressions softened fractionally, recognition flickering that her daughter had just named grief neither of them had processed completely. She set down her untouched tea. Then you'd better be prepared to defend him in ways that can't be twisted or dismissed, because they'll come after Marcus next, and if he can't withstand scrutiny, your principles won't matter. The warning proved prescient. Marcus's harassment began Thursday with vandalism, subtle enough to deny malicious intent, while clear enough to communicate threat. Flat tire with nails placed deliberately rather than accidentally acquired. Graffiti on his building locker reading "Gold Digger" in letters large enough to embarrass but small enough to claim kids did it. Anonymous emails flooding his personal account with messages suggesting he leave Victoria alone before consequences escalated beyond property damage. Marcus absorbed the attacks with the weariness of someone who'd survived worse and learned that responding often amplified problems rather than solving them. But Friday brought Noah home early from school with suspension notice and injuries that transformed abstract harassment into tangible harm requiring parental response. Marcus couldn't suppress through practice stoicism. Noah's explanation came matter-of-fact despite the split lip and bruised ribs. Tyler Morrison said, "You're using Mrs. Stone. That you're lying to get her money." I told him he was wrong. He said, "Prove it." So I hit him. Then his friends hit me. Then the teacher stopped it and suspended everyone. Marcus drove to the school despite knowing his presence would escalate situations already spiraling beyond control. The principal's office smelled like institutional carpeting and administrative burden. The furniture arranged to communicate authority, while the diplomas on walls suggested qualification for delivering judgments about children's conflicts. Marcus's voice came measured despite anger burning beneath surface control. My son defended me against bullies who reduced complex human relationships to financial transactions. And your response is suspending the victim alongside the aggressors? The principal maintained professional distance. Your son initiated physical violence. School policy requires consequences regardless of provocation. The other students will face equal suspension, but Noah's actions violated conduct standards that don't include exceptions for defending family honor. Noah gripped at Marcus's arm, his voice cutting through adult conflict with clarity, children accessed when situations required stopping parents from making things worse. Dad, it's okay. 3 days off isn't worth you getting arrested for yelling at principals. The observation landed with enough accuracy to penetrate Marcus's fury. His 8-year-old son had become the adult in this exchange, the one maintaining perspective, while Marcus lost it to rage born from watching his child pay prices for choices Marcus had made. Shame and gratitude competed for dominance, while Marcus apologized to the principal and extracted Noah from the office before saying things that would transform 3-day suspension into permanent expulsion. In the parking lot, Marcus pulled his son close. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this because of me." Noah's response carried wisdom beyond his years. "You taught me that doing the right thing costs something. This is just the cost. We pay it and keep going." Emma's essay appeared in the New York Chronicle's Sunday edition, positioned prominently in the opinion section, where editors placed pieces calculated to generate discussion and controversy in equal measure. Her teacher had submitted it without Victoria's permission or knowledge, recognizing that 10-year-old perspectives on family occasionally held insights adult commentators missed while performing sophistication. The essay's title, What Family Really Means, introduced Emma's argument with directness that made editorial hedging impossible. She wrote about watching her mother choose principles over convenience, about recognizing that her father would have approved of Marcus precisely because he didn't fit expectations, about understanding that families formed through choice mattered as much as families formed through biology or social convention. The piece went viral in ways print journalism rarely achieved, shared across platforms by people who found Emma's voice refreshing or infuriating, depending on whether they valued authenticity over propriety. Comment sections divided cleanly between those praising Victoria's courage and those condemning her judgment, between those celebrating Emma's wisdom and those questioning whether 10-year-olds should influence corporate governance through public declarations. Victoria read the essay 3 times, each pass revealing new layers in her daughter's understanding of situations adults had been navigating with considerably less clarity. Emma had synthesized months of observation into arguments Victoria herself should have been making. That competence mattered more than credentials. That character revealed itself in crisis rather than comfort. That families built on honest foundations lasted longer than families built on convenient ones. Public opinion shifted fractionally, not enough to restore stock prices or recall withdrawn investors, but enough to complicate narratives about reckless CEO choosing romance over responsibility. Emma's essay introduced variable Phillips' campaign couldn't account for. The voice of the child, whose welfare supposedly justified everyone's concern, now defending the choice adults claimed endangered her. 60 days into the 90-day countdown, Victoria's inbox delivered salvation disguised as routine meeting request. Elena Rodriguez identified herself as CEO of Rodriguez Holdings, a sustainable development fund that invested $500 million annually in companies demonstrating authentic leadership aligned with long-term value creation rather than short-term profit maximization. The meeting occurred Tuesday morning in Victoria's office, Elena arriving with reputation that preceded her. First-generation immigrant who'd built investment empire on principle that businesses treating stakeholders well ultimately perform better than businesses optimizing exclusively for shareholder returns. She'd been featured in journals Victoria read, but never imagined as potential partner because Rodriguez Holdings typically invested in established firms rather than companies experiencing the kind of volatility Stone Development currently embodied. Elena's opening dispensed with pleasantries Victoria had been preparing. I've watched your situation unfold with interest. Read your daughter's essay. Reviewed your company's history. I'm here because you did something most CEOs can't do. You chose principle over convenience and gave yourself deadline to prove principle produces results. That's exactly the leadership my fund seeks. Victoria absorbed this statement with cautious optimism born from 60 days of watching support erode rather than materialize. You understand we're down 12%, lost major investors, and facing board revolt over decisions you're calling principled. I understand you defended an employee against false accusations, chose authenticity over easy profit, and created 90-day framework to demonstrate that integrity and success aren't opposites. Your stock declined because short-term investors panicked. My fund invests in long-term value created by leaders who won't compromise character for quarterly comfort. The terms Elena offered transformed Victoria's timeline from countdown toward likely failure into pathway toward possible vindication. $200 million over 2 years, board seat for Elena, partnership on 3 affordable housing projects, an explicit requirement that Victoria maintain CEO position with full authority over strategic decisions. The investment came with strings, but they were strings that reinforced rather than constrained Victoria's approach. Marcus's role received acknowledgement that surprised Victoria more than the capital commitment. I read about the Riverton solution. That kind of practical innovation from unexpected sources is exactly what sustainable development needs. Would Mr. Cole consider consulting on structural engineering for our projects? We'd pay market rate for expertise regardless of where it comes from. Victoria looked at Elena, recognizing alliance forming based on shared values rather than shared demographics or conventional investor criteria. That's his choice. He's maintained his maintenance position even after everything that's happened. Says he likes fixing things, keeping buildings honest through work that matters whether anyone notices. Perfect. We need people who remember where they came from and why foundations matter more than facades. The emergency board meeting convened that afternoon, Victoria presenting Elena's offer with the satisfaction of people whose bets paid off before deadline expired. Philip's replacement on the board tried undermining the victory. One investor doesn't solve fundamental concerns about judgment and governance. Elena's response arrived firm. Actually, I've brought consortium. 3 other firms, total $650 million committed. Contingent on Victoria remaining CEO with full autonomy over strategic decisions. We're investing in her leadership, not committee management that compromises vision for comfort. The board's objections dissolved under weight of capital that exceeded withdrawn investments and came with validation Victoria's approach had been correct rather than reckless. Philip's shadow campaign collapsed when faced with evidence that some investors actually valued the principles he'd tried to punish Victoria for maintaining. Margaret's smile carried relief mixed with respect. Motion to accept Rodriguez Holdings' investment and related consortium commitments. All in favor? The vote passed unanimously. Even members who'd supported Philip's oversight proposal recognizing when battles were lost and graceful surrender beat continued opposition. Victoria had won, but winning felt less like triumph than exhausted relief that principles had survived contact with consequences long enough to prove they could produce results, even when results had seemed unlikely. Philip's final defeat arrived through legal channels he'd hoped to avoid. Victoria's attorney presented evidence of his coordination with former investors to manipulate stock prices during Marcus's suspension, violations of securities regulations that SEC took seriously regardless of whether intended outcomes materialized. Philip could resign quietly from all remaining advisory positions or face investigation that would destroy what remained of his reputation and potentially produce criminal charges. His resignation letter arrived by courier, language carefully crafted to suggest strategic pivot rather than forced retreat. Victoria filed it without reading past the first paragraph, recognizing that some victories required accepting opposition's surrender without demanding public humiliation that satisfied emotional needs but created future enemies. 75 days into the timeline, Marcus and Noah began staying at the penthouse on weekends. The arrangement started tentatively, nobody quite naming what it meant when Marcus showed up Friday evenings with overnight bags and left Monday mornings for work that began in the same building where he'd sleep on different floors. Emma created rules that transformed awkwardness into routine. Shoes by the door, Noah's toothbrush in the guest bathroom, ice cream drawer designated for weekend consumption. Sunday morning cooking became ritual, where 4 people navigated kitchen space designed for solitary food preparation. Marcus taught Emma pancake flipping technique, while Noah supervised chocolate chip distribution with the seriousness of people performing quality control on matters affecting breakfast success. Victoria watched them work, recognizing that families form not through grand gestures, but through accumulated small moments, where people learned to occupy space together without requiring constant negotiation about who belonged where. The conversation Victoria had been avoiding finally arrived Saturday evening after the children were asleep, and adults couldn't postpone difficult questions behind excuses about protecting young ears from complicated truths. Marcus stood at the penthouse windows where Manhattan sprawled below like circuit board lighting the darkness, his voice quiet. Where does this go? Realistically? Victoria joined him at the glass. I don't know. I've never dated someone while running a company and raising a daughter and recovering from board revolts. I can't give you the life you're accustomed to. No private jets or vacation homes or the kind of security that comes from marrying someone whose income matches yours. I don't need those things. I need someone who shows up when showing up matters. You've done that consistently since the elevator. That's worth more than any prenuptial asset inventory. Marcus turned to face her fully. I have PTSD from a lawsuit that destroyed my career. I wake up panicking about failures that happened years ago. Noah's still processing his mother leaving us because poverty wasn't part of her marriage plan. We come with damage that doesn't heal just because circumstances improve. And I come with a dead husband I still love, and a daughter who remembers him, and a company built on his foundation that I'm terrified of failing. We're both carrying things that don't resolve easily. Maybe that's why this works. We understand that healing isn't prerequisite for moving forward. It's something we do together while building whatever this becomes. The kiss that followed felt less like romance and more like treaty between people acknowledging they'd been fighting same battles from different positions and might accomplish more through alliance than isolation. Neither of them had wanted this when Victoria planned her 4-month candidate selection process. But what they wanted and what they needed had turned out to be different things, and Emma had been right about which mattered more. Block 17 construction had completed on schedule despite early engineering problems, the building now housing families who'd been waiting years for affordable units in neighborhoods where market rate rents exceeded what honest work could sustain. Marcus took Victoria there on day 85, ostensibly to show her final inspections, but actually to return them to the place where their story had shifted from professional courtesy to something neither had quite known how to name yet. They stood in the lobby where elevator rescue had occurred months prior. The car, now functioning properly, thanks to relay replacements Marcus had personally supervised. He guided her to the building's roof deck, where tenants would gather for community events and children would play in spaces designed for safety rather than aesthetic appeal. Marcus's voice carried the texture of someone who'd rehearsed words without quite perfecting their delivery. When I lost everything 5 years ago, I thought the best parts of my life were finished. That engineering career defined me, and without it, I was just someone who fixed things other people broke. Then I met you and Emma in an elevator that wouldn't cooperate. And I remembered that fixing things actually matters more than designing them. That showing up when people need you counts for more than credentials proving you're qualified to help. He knelt on the roof deck, the gesture awkward in work clothes on concrete still bearing construction dust. Victoria Stone, I don't fit your world. Probably never will. But I fit your life, and you fit mine. And Emma and Noah have already decided we're family, even if adults are still negotiating terminology. I'm asking if you'll build something with me. Not empire or image or the kind of family that looks good in photographs. Just the real thing, messy and complicated and honest. The ring he produced came from his grandmother, sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. The kind of jewelry that carried history instead of price tags. Victoria's tears arrived before words, the physical response bypassing calculation about whether this was wise or reckless, or some combination that defied categorization. Her answer came certain despite uncertainty about everything except the essential truth. Yes, 1,000 times yes, because you're right, you don't fit my world. But you helped me build a better one where fitting matters less than being real. Emma and Noah emerged from the stairwell where they had been waiting with the transparency of children who'd been told to hide but lacked adult skill at subtle positioning. They'd clearly been part of Marcus's planning, the family compass engraved before the proposal happened, the certainty that Victoria would say yes built into logistics that required child participation. Noah's question arrived pragmatic. Does this mean we're actually brothers and sisters now instead of just friends? Emma's response carried the finality of people who decided outcomes before adults caught up. We've been family since the elevator. This just makes it official. Day 88 brought final vindication disguised as press conference Victoria had scheduled to provide closure on the 90-day challenge before deadline expired. Stone Tower lobby filled with media who'd been covering the story since Emma's ballroom declaration, expecting either victory lap or resignation delivered with dignity that made failure look like principled choice. Victoria stood at the podium, Elena Rodriguez beside her, providing visible evidence that new investors existed and supported continued leadership. The numbers projected behind her told their own story. Stock price recovered to 2% above pre-controversy levels, employee retention up 15%, 3 affordable housing projects secured with the Rodriguez Holdings partnership, providing capital and credibility that Phillips' withdrawal had threatened to eliminate. Her opening acknowledged costs without apologizing for paying them. 88 days ago, I made a choice many people called reckless. I publicly acknowledged my relationship with Marcus Cole, a maintenance supervisor who'd been falsely accused of security violations by investors who saw his competence as threat to their influence. I was told this choice would destroy the company, damage our brand, Cost me everything I'd built. The pause let cameras capture her expression. The media training Victoria had received years ago finally serving purpose beyond quarterly earnings announcements. They were partly right. It cost me. Lost investors, board members, stock value, relationships with people who measured my worth exclusively through corporate performance. But here's what I gained. The slides advanced. Rodriguez Holdings investment, consortium commitments totaling $650 million, employee satisfaction metrics showing Stone Development becoming an employer of choice for people who valued authentic leadership, 3 housing projects that would shelter families while generating returns, proving principle and profit weren't opposites. More importantly, I gained something balance sheets don't measure: integrity. I gained a partner who sees me rather than my net worth, who solves problems through competence rather than connections, who shows Emma that character matters more than credentials. Last night, Marcus Cole asked me to marry him. I said yes. The engagement ring caught light, cameras zooming to capture detail that would fuel discussions about whether sapphires represented downward mobility or authentic choice. Victoria didn't care. She'd stopped measuring decisions by whether they satisfied people who'd never have to live with consequences. Marcus joined her at the podium, uncomfortable but present, his voice steady despite discomfort. I don't have prepared remarks, just want to say Victoria took a risk on someone most people overlooked. I don't take that lightly. I'll spend however long we have together proving that character matters more than credentials, that competence exists in unexpected places, that families form through choice as much as circumstance. A reporter's launched questions designed to generate controversy or sound bites, asking whether Marcus felt pressure marrying above his station, whether Victoria worried about public perception, whether this represented modern romance or professional self-destruction. Victoria fielded inquiries with the skill of someone who'd learned that some questions didn't deserve answers beyond polite deflection. Emma stepped to the microphone without invitation, her presence startling adults who'd designed this event for controlled messaging rather than child participation. I just want to say I picked the right dad, and my mom picked the right person. That's all that matters. The simplicity of it diffused attempts to manufacture drama from decisions that felt straightforward to the 10-year-old who'd initiated everything. Media had difficulty maintaining controversy when the child whose welfare justified everyone's concern kept insisting she was happy with outcomes adults were debating. 6 months later, upstate New York countryside provided setting for ceremony that deliberately avoided everything Victoria's position typically required. White tent accommodated 40 guests, family and close friends, deliberately excluding investors and board members whose presence would transform wedding into networking opportunity. No media, no photographers beyond the one hired to document moments for private albums rather than public consumption. Victoria's dress came simple, ivory fabric without designer labels or the kind of embellishment that announced costs through excess. Emma stood beside her as maid of honor, while Noah performed best man duties with seriousness suggesting he understood significance beyond his years. Evelyn walked her daughter down the aisle with expression-carrying acceptance that had arrived slowly but completely, recognizing that Marcus made Victoria happy in ways that mattered more than whether he satisfied social expectations about appropriate matches. The vows they'd written together avoided traditional language about richer or poorer, because those categories felt meaningless when the CEO married the maintenance supervisor who'd saved her flagship project. Marcus promised to keep being brave enough to be seen, to show up when things broke, to remember that families formed through accumulated small moments mattered more than grand gestures. Victoria promised to keep choosing authenticity over appearance, to build lives rather than images, to remember that what they built together mattered more than what she built alone. The reception featured barbecue instead of catering designed to impress, string lights providing illumination that felt warmer than chandeliers, children running between tables with the freedom of spaces designed for joy rather than decorum. Nora's toast celebrated the woman who proved you could keep power and heart simultaneously. Marcus's toast thanked Victoria and Emma for seeing Janitor and thinking Engineer, for seeing Broken and thinking Fixable, for seeing him. The Brookstone Scholarship Fund announcement provided wedding gift to attendees. $2 million endowed to help 50 people the annually rebuild after wrongful termination or legal injustice. Marcus's consulting income and Victoria's personal wealth combining to create safety net for people navigating situations they'd both survived and understood from experience rather than theory. 1 year later, Block 17's ribbon-cutting ceremony brought them full circle to the building where everything started. Victoria spoke about projects valuing people over prestige while Marcus stood with Noah, watching tenants move into apartments that wouldn't exist without engineering solutions he'd provided during employment. Nobody thought qualified him for problem solving at that level. The rooftop deck where he'd proposed now hosted families whose children played on equipment Marcus had personally inspected. His dual role as maintenance supervisor and chief consulting engineer providing skills that kept buildings safe and honest. Emma and Noah navigated between adult conversations and childhood games with the comfort of siblings who'd chosen each other before legal documents made it official. Marcus's career had transformed without requiring him to abandon the work he valued. Morning hours in offices solving structural problems for Rodriguez Holdings projects, afternoon hours with tool belt ensuring buildings remained functional for people who trusted infrastructure they rarely thought about until it failed. He'd found balance between the engineering career he'd lost and the maintenance work that taught him what mattered, proving that both could coexist when systems allowed for complexity beyond rigid categories. Victoria's company had stabilized at valuations exceeding pre-controversy levels, investors learning that authentic leadership attracted talent and generated returns that short-term profit maximization couldn't match. Stone Development had become employer of choice for people who wanted to build careers at companies where principles survived contact with pressure, where doing right things mattered even when expensive. Standing on the roof deck watching the city spread below them, Marcus and Victoria recognized that their story would never satisfy people who measured success exclusively through credentials or social positioning. But they'd built something real from materials others overlooked: competence without pedigree, character without pretense, family formed through choice rather than convention. Marcus spoke first, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned his worth wasn't determined by others' recognition. Do you miss it? The version of your life where everything looked right on paper even if it felt empty in practice? Victoria leaned into him. I miss not fighting constantly to prove that principle and profit aren't opposites. But I don't miss pretending that image mattered more than reality. Emma and Noah taught me that some things can't be measured in spreadsheets or stock prices. You taught me that competence exists in unexpected places when we're brave enough to look. Below them, tenants celebrated new homes with the relief of people who'd been waiting years for affordable housing in neighborhoods that remembered their existence. 120 families housed because a janitor remembered how to read blueprints, and a CEO remembered that people mattered more than portfolios. The math worked in ways quarterly reports never captured, but humans understood perfectly. Emma appeared beside them, Noah trailing with the comfortable familiarity of children who'd learned to navigate adult spaces without requiring constant supervision. Are you staying up here forever or coming down for cake? Victoria smiled at her daughter. Coming down. Some things matter more than views from rooftops. They descended together, 4 people who'd formed family through crisis and choice, through elevator rescues and board revolts, through principles maintained when abandoning them would have been easier. Status hadn't built their family. Love had, respect held it together, and honesty made it the kind of home where broken things got fixed and people got seen, and belonging didn't require credentials or pedigree or anything except showing up when showing up mattered most.